I know that one group of big stakeholders for DGS are the thousands of local governments and schools and nonprofits in the state who use the state's contracts. And I know that the COSTARS program has been a big, I would say, runaway success for DGS. Tell me a little bit about why you think it's become so popular with local governments and schools in the state.
Well, I think you know, the main reason is that it's administratively easier to use than you know, when if local governments have the option of using cooperative contracts like COSTARS, or they can solicit on their own, and soliciting on their own takes time and effort, and you know, and most you know, most local government procurement folks are wearing 17 different hats, right? They don't have a whole lot of time to devote to procurement, and so I think COSTARS is incredibly successful in part because it's very convenient. I think it's successful because we provide a wide array of local options. So all those contracts tend to be multiple award, and they tend to have locally available vendors on those multiple award contracts. So you know, local governments have the option of going through a state contract in order to access a local supplier, which I think is really, really valuable to them.
Yeah.
And you know, and I do think that the costs, you know, there's always a need to shop and to evaluate based on specific requirements, but I think in the main the costs are competitive. You know, so our customers are seeing value. You know, I mean, to the tune of, you know, more than $1 billion a year is in volume is being done through that program, and it just continues to grow.
And I think that dollar amount, that $1 billion, is a really good barometer on how well managed the program is and why folks are coming to it. You had told me a couple of years ago that one of your concerns, though, was that local governments and schools really didn't have a mechanism to discern which of the suppliers on a COSTARS contract were performing well for their peers and which ones weren't. Tell me a little bit about sort of why that matters to, you know, the Secretary of General Services and what you've done about it.
Yeah, so I think that's true. I think, you know, I think to a large extent the you know, the cooperative contracting landscape out there looks a little bit like the Wild West, right? Our local governments and school districts and folks who use these cooperative contracts, they have a whole array of options that they can use. They can use COSTARS contracts, they can use U.S. Communities contracts, they can, I've lost track of the number of cooperatives that are available.
Yeah.
And one of the things that we've heard from local governments and from vendors, you know, is that there's a real concern about local decision makers being equipped to make good decisions, given that they have that vast array of choices. You know, my concern as the Secretary of General Services is that, you know, for our own contracts within the COSTARS program, you know, they all carry our brand and our endorsement, and you know, and I want our customers to be able to go to those options with confidence, that they're getting a great deal, that they're going to get a quality supplier. But the challenge has been that you know, public procurement folks, in part because a lot of them are part-time locally, but also just in general because it's the culture of sort of working within government, right? Is folks don't have a tendency to talk to each other as much as they probably ought to about how their suppliers are doing. You know, if we run a procurement and we collect a bunch of supplier references, you know, the references are always glowing because the supplier has complete control over what references are provided.
Yep.
So what I think we need is an independent way of collecting and aggregating supplier performance information, even if it's just informal comments about how suppliers are doing. And we have to get that from the customers. That's what led us down the path we took with Procurated. And, so far we're really, really pleased with the results. I think, we've seen great growth in the number of comments that COSTARS users have given, the number of ratings they've provided for suppliers. And we're certainly hearing from COSTARS members that it's valuable, right? That they're able to go to Procurated and get some insight that they didn't have before they make a purchasing decision, which is really what I think we need to do.
Yeah.
I think the longer term challenge is taking that information and that feedback and using it more intentionally to help our suppliers improve their own performance. I'm excited to move in that direction.
Yeah. I know we'll have a few more minutes, Curt, but one thing that I know has always been a huge source of pride for you has been the way the state implemented Lean. Maybe give folks who may not know a lot about Lean a quick 30, 60 seconds on what is Lean and how does it work in government, and then more important, what you've done at DGS and across the Commonwealth to bring the Lean principles to the public sector.
Sure. That's a long conversation, David. So I think here's a thumbnail, right? So Lean is commonly misperceived as being entirely focused on just process improvement, with a view toward removing cost, right, or removing waste, which is sort of the key phrase within Lean. But our big learning over the last 4 years or so, as we've tried to implement what I hope is a successful and lasting Lean program, has been that it's a bit more involved than that, right? It really breaks down across 5 dimensions. Lean is about ensuring that you have clarity of purpose, that you know what it is you're trying to achieve. It's about understanding processes and achieving standard processes. It's about management systems. So how do we keep score? How do we know if our processes are delivering better results over time or not? And it's about capabilities. So do the people we have the right capabilities, the right skill set, the right tool set in order to be able to deliver continuous improvement? And then finally, and probably most importantly, it's about having a human-centered culture. Because as it turns out, Lean relies on folks on the front lines being ready and willing to raise their hand and say, "Hey, this could be better." And you can't get that done, right? They won't do that unless there's a climate of trust, right? Unless there's an understanding that everyone is sort of in this together, and that they won't suffer adverse consequences for having identified something that could be improved. And so we've been really, really focused on all 5 of those things. As it turns out, if you don't focus on all 5, the ones you don't focus on will take care of themselves, and not necessarily in the way that you prefer, right? On the process side, yeah, we've had some great successes. We've reduced the average cycle time for agencies signing a new lease when they need new property in the Commonwealth from 18 months to about 3 months.
Wow.
And and we've pulled tons. A lot of that $1 billion, right, has come from the kinds of process improvements that we've been able to implement, not just in our own agency, but help to implement across other agencies. Mm-hmm. And really good reason to be pleased with those results. The challenge is making them sustainable, and building lean into the culture, so that at the end of the day, it doesn't matter anymore whether I'm sitting in this chair or someone else is. And I think we're making progress there. It's a long road.
Do you think that the road is interrupted by sort of the COVID response and working from home, or is there possible that actually helps to give it even more fuel?
I don't know yet. We're definitely hearing from, I have about half of the agency is working from home right now, and the other half is working on site, mainly because they do jobs that require them to be on site.
Yeah.
And what we're hearing from the folks who are working remotely is that they feel more productive. And what we're seeing, to the extent that we're able to measure that productivity, is that in many instances they are more productive, which is fascinating.
Yeah.
On the other hand, we've been so intentional about building culture that having everybody working from home really throws a monkey wrench in that effort. Right. This has really made that challenge more challenging, and we're just going to keep muddling through until we figure it out. But I think no question, COVID's going to have a big impact on us culturally. I think the long-term impact is positive. I think we're going to be on a lower cost trajectory. We're going to be more productive. And I think people are going to be happier. But I also think we're going to have to be even more intentional about making sure that, that we build a corporate culture that makes, that's positive.
Yeah. Well, from everything you said today, Curt, I think there's lots of reasons to be optimistic about that. I think you really spent a lot of energy and time and focus building a very successful and winning culture at BGS, and it's paid off for you, and it's paid off for the taxpayers. And I want to thank you for joining us today, Curt. It was great having you. Loved hearing your opinions on so many interesting and important topics.